we're good. Okay, so the nervous system is in charge of inputs and outputs. So if you think about when we went through homeostasis, what we were seeing was some sort of sensory information was being relayed to a control center, which we will now call the central nervous system. And then the central nervous system would provide some sort of output, some sort of response back out to an effector. And we call that whole pathway a reflex arc, going from stimulus to response. That is a reflex arc. And what we're going to go through today are the different divisions of the nervous system. So how do we actually divide this thing up to organize it so that we can actually talk about it in an organized fashion. So for now, just worry about the title. Nervous system organization. We're going to go through 3 different major classifications. We're going to talk about central versus peripheral. We're going to talk about somatic versus autonomic. And then we're going to get into afferent versus efferent pathways. Here we go. So if we move to the top left here. Let's see if I can get this zoomed in correctly. All right, central versus peripheral. So these are the 2 major classifications of the nervous system when we talk about like nervous system anatomy. So if I were to start like looking at different structures that make up your nervous system, we'd be able to classify all of them as either being part of the central or peripheral nervous system. It's kind of like the axial and appendicular of the nervous system world. It's the 2 major branches, 2 major classifications of the anatomy. The central nervous system is going to be made up of the brain and spinal cord, and it's in charge of receiving that incoming stimulus, making some sort of decision. I'm going to say decision with quotes because it's not like it's a conscious thing. This is all through biochemistry. But we're going to get some sort of decision made based on that stimulus. And then a response is going to be kicked back out to an effector to do something with that stimulus, to respond to it. One of the major characteristics of living organisms is that they're capable of responding to their environment. The nervous system provides that bridge between the stimulus and the response. All right. So then the peripheral nervous system is going to be in charge of both receiving the incoming stimulus, then communicating with the central nervous system, and then responding to what the central nervous system provides as far as the information goes. Okay, so the peripheral nervous system is made up of all of your nerves. And we can classify your nerves as either being cranial or spinal nerves, depending on where they're found. Any nerve that is servicing the brain is going to be considered a cranial nerve. And any nerve that is servicing the rest of the body we would call a spinal nerve if it's branching off of the spinal cord. In order to be classified a peripheral nerve, it has to in some way extend out of the central nervous system. So it either has to start in the central nervous system and terminate outside of it, or start outside of the nervous system and terminate inside of the central, or start and terminate both outside of the central nervous system. So it needs to in some way be separate from the brain or the spinal cord. And then we also have like 2 kind of directional terms. So if we say that a nerve is a central fiber, what that means is it is sending information towards the central nervous system. If we call it a peripheral fiber, then it's going to be something that is sending information away from the central nervous system. So those are more of directional terms than anything else. All right, so those are our 2 major classifications, central versus peripheral. So if you gave me any nerve or any structure within your nervous system, we would first classify it based on this. All right. We're going to add each section to these charts as we talk about them. So the next thing we're going to do is plug these into our charts here. am I good to slide over? I'm just going to get ahead of you guys because I'm not having to write it. I used to write these with you every time, but I got tired of doing it 4 times a day. So, you know, it just is what it is. Right, let me start scooting. Here we go. Slowly. Slowly. Oh, I can actually keep it all on the same screen. Perfect. Okay, so in this box up here, like in this chart that we're about to make, way over to the left, everything that's shaded in here, that's going to be part of the central nervous system. So keep that up here in this box. And then below that, we're going to be talking about structures within the peripheral nervous system. We're going to be going through what's called a reflex arc, where we have a stimulus in the peripheral communicating with the central, and then getting a response back into the peripheral. All right, the next part that we're going to talk about are the two major classifications of the pathways that information flow get filed under. We can either talk about information going towards the central nervous system from the peripheral, that would be an afferent pathway, or we could talk about the response that is being generated by the central nervous system being kicked back out into the peripheral. That would be an efferent pathway. That's our next classification here. I need to slide down. So I'm going to zoom out just to give you an idea of spatial awareness of what we're going to be doing here. We need some stuff underneath this chart. Okay. If you look at where this is, we are going to be doing it right here to the left of it. So that's why I'm zooming in. Okay. So afferent versus efferent. These are two terms that we're going to need to know. So an afferent pathway is going to be the incoming stimulus, so that kind of sensory pathway that is being sent back out to some structure within the nervous system. If you think of this like our homeostatic mechanisms, this would be like the arrow going from the receptor to the control center. This is that afferent pathway, sending information out to the central nervous system to be integrated. Then, after the central nervous system has integrated, meaning it's made a decision based on that incoming stimulus, we are going to get the arrow that was going from the control center out to the effector. We would call that the efferent pathway, or the efferent division. This is going to be that outgoing response, that outgoing motor pathway that's going to generate some sort of action in an effector. So this is a vital part of maintaining homeostasis. If you are in an area that is way too hot and your proteins are going to start to become denatured and cause you to die, you need to have some sort of way of recognizing that it's too hot where you are, and some sort of way of cooling you off internally so that you don't end up denaturing your proteins, for instance. So these afferent pathways are vital in maintaining homeostasis. Now, if we were to look at just one pathway, from incoming sensory information to outgoing effector action, we would call that a reflex arc. So a reflex arc is going to be made up of the stimulus and the response. Alright, we good on those two? So, I did a little sketch here to kind of show you what this would look like. So here is a reflex arc. First thing I want you to do is marvel at how good of a finger that is. That is maybe the best sketch of anything I've ever done in my entire life. It even has like the little skin wrinkles and everything. I thought that was great. Anyway, so what we see here is a reflex arc let's say that you are walking into your kitchen and you've been asked to do the dishes, and there is a pan on the stove, and you don't realize that that pan has just been used to cook something, and it's still really hot. And you go to pick up the metal handle of the pan without a little, holder on the side, or oven mitt, whatever it might be, and you touch it, and ouch, you're being burned. Well, what we're going to see is an afferent pathway sent from those receptors in your skin out to the central nervous system. Central nervous system, whether it's part of your spinal cord or part of your brain, in this case it'd be part of your spinal cord, is going to immediately relay an efferent response out to the skeletal muscle in your hand and arm to jerk your hand away and let go of the pan. And we would call that a reflex arc. So we have the afferent relay of the stimulus, and then the efferent relay from the central nervous system out to an effector to generate the response of pulling your hand away from that hot item. And so if you think about our homeostatic mechanisms, this is just like the top of the mechanism, right? So like down here, we would then have the response, the physiological variable, and then the stimulus. So you can see how a reflex arc is kind of just like the top of a homeostatic mechanism. The afferent pathway is the arrow connecting the receptor to the control center. The efferent pathway is that communication piece from the central nervous system out to the effector to generate the response. So we're going to be seeing homeostasis coming back over and over and over again. And this is one prime example of those homeostatic mechanisms coming back. We call them reflex arcs, from stimulus to response, and everything in between. All right. So any questions on that? Good. Okay. So next thing we need to look at then is the somatic versus the autonomic nervous system. This is a subdivision of the peripheral nervous system. So let's go ahead and get the this chart filled in where up to the somatic and autonomic nervous system. Don't worry about anything underneath it. But if we were to start with the nervous system, we could first divide it into central and peripheral. The central nervous system is made up of your brain and your spinal cord. And the spinal cord is going to serve as the bridge between your brain and the peripheral nervous system. So let me go ahead and zoom this out. Your peripheral nervous system we can further subdivide into the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. And if you think about it, okay, peripheral nervous system, that's everything other than your brain and your spinal cord. So this is dealing with nerves that connect to all of the structures that actually do something physically, whether it's your stomach or your diaphragm or your skeletal muscles or your glands. All of those are controlled through your peripheral nervous system, right? They're all connected to these nerves. So these are all of the structures that are actually like physically doing something. These are all of our effectors. Now we can subdivide those into the effectors that you can control consciously and the ones that you can't. As you're sitting here doing stuff, as you are moving your eyes and reading and writing stuff down, you're using your somatic nervous system. These are all things that you can consciously control, that you can do. But at the same time, your heart is beating, and your smooth muscle in your nervous system, or your smooth muscle through your digestive tract is churning, right? And your smooth muscle in your blood vessels are opening and closing, adjusting blood pressure. There's all sorts of things happening kind of right in the background. That are not things that you're consciously thinking about controlling right now. Those are all part of your autonomic nervous system. So what we're going to do next is break down the difference between the somatic and autonomic. So don't worry about sympathetic or parasympathetic yet. So I'm going to slide over here to the left. And right here. So somatic versus autonomic. Right. These are both part of your peripheral nervous system. The somatic nervous system is going to be pathways that are under your conscious control. These are going to be your skeletal muscles, things that you can make move if you want to. You can move your ears around. You can write with your hand. You can stand up, sit down. All of those things are part of your somatic nervous system. And like all parts of your nervous system, we're going to have both afferent and efferent divisions. So there's going to be the stimulus side, sending stimuli out, and then we're going to have the response side, bringing in some sort of response through the efferent pathway. And we'll name these here in just a second on your diagrams. So those are all things that are under your conscious control. So when you think of a reflex arc, if you touch something hot, and then you are going to generate a response where you pull back your hand from the using your skeletal muscle. That's going to be using your somatic nervous system, where we are generating a response from structures that are under your conscious control. Okay. Kind of slide into all the purple. We good on green? You're good. Slide to purple. Okay, so then there's also the autonomic nervous system, also called ANS, and these are pathways that are controlling the autonomous structures in your body. And I put autonomous in quotes because there is actual, like, you can affect your autonomic nervous system through your thoughts and your actions, but indirectly. So, like, depending on your headspace, you could be more or less stressed one day, right? Which is manifestation that you would feel through your autonomic nervous system. But you can't sit here. If I told you to make your smooth muscle in your stomach contract, you can't do that. Like, you can't just sit here and make that contract. Right? So that's part of your autonomic nervous system. These are going to be controlling things like your smooth muscle and your cardiac muscle and your glands, all of this stuff that runs in the background that you don't really think about to control. They're also going to contain afferent and efferent divisions. And the autonomic nervous system, their efferent pathways are further subdivided. And you've heard of these before. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. At least I think you probably have. If you're in psychology, I know you have. So if we focus just on the efferent pathways, again, this is information coming back from the central nervous system to generate a response. Those get filed under two different categories. You could have efferent pathways that work through the sympathetic nervous system. These are going to control all of your fight or flight responses. You could also have an efferent pathway that is operating under the parasympathetic nervous system. And that is going to be working through all of the effector organs that are in charge of rest and repair, meaning returning you back to baseline after some sort of stress. So getting us back to normal ground states, whether it be your heart rate or your rate of respiration, all of those things. That's all going to be controlling your parasympathetic nervous system. The afferent pathway, the stimulus side, only gets classified as one thing, and that's going to be called your visceral sensory division. So those are going to be the receptors that are in charge of tracking all of the things that are outside of your conscious control. Smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, gland secretions, all of that. So your efferent pathways get further classifications. And again, this is all part of your autonomic nervous system, which is all part of your peripheral nervous system. It's like a Russian nesting ball. Peripherals on the outside. Inside of that, you have the autonomic, and inside of that, you have either sympathetic or parasympathetic. You guys even know what Russian nesting dolls are? Just remember those things? My grandparents had some. They were really creepy. Kind of cool. They were really creepy. I remember as a kid, it kind of freaked me out. Alright. We good on the purple? I know I'm kind of rushing you guys. I'm rushing nesting doll, you guys. That was awful. Not my best. No. I need to teach chemistry because that's better chemistry works. Alright. Good here. Okay, so that takes care of like all of the information side of things. Now we just need to get all of our charts filled in and kind of run through each of these so you can kind of see how it all fits together. Okay, so I'm going to slide over here. We'll go ahead and get our sympathetic and parasympathetic part on the bottom there. Is there anything else on this chart that you haven't gotten filled in yet? So if we take a trip down the peripheral nervous system side, then the first classification would be your peripheral nervous system. If we are talking about structures that you're consciously controlling, then we're talking about your somatic nervous system. If we're talking about structures that are running in the background that are kind of outside of your conscious control, then we're talking about the autonomic nervous system. And then, depending on whether we're dealing with fight or flight stuff, so kind of ramping up your body to deal with some sort of big stimulus, you'd be dealing with the sympathetic nervous system. If we're talking about restoring you back to ground states, then we're dealing with the parasympathetic nervous system. Or just general keeping you alive, keeping the heart beating, keeping you breathing, all that stuff. Normal rest and repair. Maintenance, if you will. Okay. So let's get this chart filled in at the top. We're going to focus on the somatic nervous system first. So what I want to do is write this as a reflex arc. So I want you to start down here at the stimulus. And we're going to work our way up through an afferent pathway and then back down through an efferent. So imagine that you are, again, in the kitchen and you touch a hot stove. That's going to be our stimulus. That's going to be picked up by a somatic receptor. And the somatic receptor, in this case, it would be some kind of receptor in your skin that's detecting that change in temperature, is going to send through the afferent pathway, so A for afferent, E for efferent. So through the afferent pathway, is going to send a message through the somatic sensory division. That's what we call the afferent pathway of the somatic nervous system, the somatic sensory division. That information is then going to enter the central nervous system. The part of the somatic nervous system that is found in the central nervous system is called the somatic integration center. And it is going to send an efferent message through the efferent pathway, which we call the somatic motor division, out to some sort of somatic effector. Typically it's skeletal muscle, and we will generate some sort of response using our skeletal muscle. This could be something as simple as, like just now, I saw out of my peripheral vision an image walk past the door, and my somatic nervous system kicked in to investigate that stimulus further by me moving my eyes over towards the door to see what was walking by. So I had an afferent sensory message sent to my brain integrated that information, and we got a response generated. This is a reflex arc from stimulus to response. Okay? Alright, so that would be things under your conscious control. And I'm going to slide over to the autonomic Keep in mind, I have color-coded this whole thing. So everything somatics in green, everything autonomics in purple. So we'll slide over to the autonomic side. This is the last part. We're done after this. So in the autonomic nervous system, again, start at the stimulus and go to response. So we would have some sort of stimulus be picked up by your visceral receptors of the visceral sensory division, which is the afferent pathway of your autonomic nervous system. Ugh, it's a mouthful. That afferent message is then going to be integrated by the autonomic integration centers of your autonomic nervous system. Keep in mind when we're up here, we're in the central nervous system. So this would be a structure in your brain, for instance. Okay. Then, depending on what needs to happen, let's say that you're out hiking and you see a bear. Okay. When you see a bear, your body is immediately going to prepare you to either run away from the bear or fight the bear. You're going to fight or flight. Now, if you know anything about bears, you shouldn't do either one. But your body is still going to respond to this threat in the same way. And it's going to respond to this threat through the sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system. So we will get an efferent message sent through your sympathetic division to some autonomic effectors. You're going to spit a whole bunch of glucose out into your bloodstream from your liver. You're going to break down glycogen and shoot out glucose. You're going to spit a whole bunch of adrenaline out of your adrenal glands on top of your kidneys into your bloodstream, which will then travel through your bloodstream, and whenever it's picked up in receptors in your heart is going to beat faster. So we're going to shoot out adrenaline, we're going to shoot out some glucose. So now we have quick energy and we have a way to transport that energy. You're going to increase your rate of respiration, so you're going to start breathing faster. You're going to dilate blood vessels to certain parts of your body and push a whole bunch of blood to your major skeletal muscle groups so that you have a large energy supply to fight or flight from this bear. So those are all effects or all responses through the sympathetic nervous system of the autonomic nervous system. We're going to generate that response. Then, what we'll see is, since you know about bears and how to avoid being eaten by them, you know that instead of trying to run away from this bear or trying to fight this bear, you will lose. Then, what you really should do is freeze and then very slowly back away from the bear, exactly the direction you came from, but you do not turn your back to this bear. Because if you turn your back to the bear, they will chase you. So you just slowly walk backwards from the bear, maintaining a visual on the bear. And then eventually the bear becomes disinterested in eating you and it walks away. And at this point, you no longer have the perceived threat through your visceral receptors of this bear being present. Okay? And then you're going to get efferent messages sent through your parasympathetic nervous system to restore everything back to ground state. And we are going to hopefully go back to a rest and repair situation in our nice, serene woodland environment where we're not being chased by bears. So the autonomic nervous system, again, its effects can be broken down into either fight or flight sympathetic divisions or rest and repair parasympathetic divisions. The stimulus side is always going to be through this visceral sensory division. Afferent pathway is always the same. The output, the efferent pathways can vary depending on which effectors we're dealing with. And again, these are all just classifications. So if we look at any reflex arc in your body, we can classify it. We could tell where it's in the peripheral nervous system, when it's in the central nervous system. We can tell which afferent pathway it's moving through, if it's moving through the somatic or visceral. And then we could also say which efferent pathway the response is coming in. Is it coming back into a skeletal muscle through the somatic motor division? Is it coming back in through the sympathetic division for a fight or flight response? Or is it coming back through a parasympathetic division to bring everything back to ground state? Okay. So always be thinking of this from stimulus to response in a reflex arc. All right. That's it. What questions do you have? Cut our recording here. For those of you following along at home, have a great rest of your day.